Hi, everyone. This is an introduction to another new series that I'm very excited about. I had asked Daryl many months ago if he would like to be guided for my channel because it's so helpful to watch other people being guided, since we all have so many of the same starting points and questions. Daryl was interested and willing to let everyone in on his process in privacy so that others can benefit from the work he's doing, which I'm so appreciative for and I think is so brave, commendable, and selfless. That idea got put on hold for a while, and he ended up joining one of my deep dive groups. We've been working together every other week in this group, and he has had so many insights and made such progress that I thought it would be a perfect time to start our one-to-one sessions here. As a little lead in for the series, I'm sharing his segment from our most recent group meeting. There are a lot of useful pointers that cover a lot of ground here, from the first fetter to the sixth. I hope you enjoy it and find something useful in it. Please keep an eye out in the coming weeks for the first of our one-to-one sessions together. Also, I never share segments from my deep dive groups unless the participants have agreed, so I'm thankful to Kaiser and Kristyn for allowing me to post this clip unedited. Enjoy.
So, you know, there's been something that's kind of been on my mind, but I want to mention it because it may be worth mentioning.
Yeah, it usually is.
But you said something to Kaiser that stopped me, kind of gave pause. I wish I'd written it down. I wish I'd made notes how you exactly said it. You said something to the effect about the experience of no self being this seeing that the center that we live from isn't really there.
Yeah.
And that moment that seemed like seeing through the first fetter last summer,
Yep.
I don't know that it was like that. It was more a moment of several seconds of just seeing that there was no such thing as any sort of central self.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know that it was an experience kind of like what you described. So when I was listening to you say that, I thought, sounds like maybe there's more work to be done.
There's always more work to be done. I mean, even as we go through, that's why we say we work with the fetters in a cyclical manner because there are always times you're going to find yourself so many people who like we have talked to who have gone, they're clearly in the like eighth and ninth fetter thing, and then they'll be selfing about something else. And it's like there's just something deeper there that needs to be looked into. So like right now, or at any other point, but right now, is it possible for you to experience sitting here where you are right now without that sort of centrality of experience that we normally consider ourselves to have? Like there's something dense about our usual experience of existence.
See, that's the thing that that's something that I look at regularly.
Hmm.
And that's the thing that keeps drawing attention back is the fact that there is sort of this sense of, and of course, maybe it's a misunderstanding, maybe it's problems in the language,
Yeah,
and understanding exactly what someone means, which is
of
that really
course.
possible?
Yeah.
Um, but that's been kind of a sticking point for a while. Is that there seems to be this sort of sense of here viewing out there
Yeah.
that is pretty persistent.
Yeah. Yeah. And here viewing out there can be more of a sixth fetter thing, which is why it is tricky to talk about these sorts of things. Um, that is something that's not necessarily part of the first fetter region. Still
Okay.
something excellent to look into, though. You know, going back into what is it that feels like here looking out there, and why is that? What I'm talking about more with the first fetter is that, and again, this isn't necessarily this way for everybody, but it does seem very consistent with what a lot of people experience. There is something which feels solid and like there's a what we take to be the self is a combination of physical sensations, often along the middle of the torso, the middle of the chest, up through the head. There's a sense of muscle contraction. There's like a heaviness. There's feeling of all of the musculature of the face and all of the expressions, all of the movement of the mouth and the jaw, tension in the neck, vibration in the throat of speaking, feeling of the heartbeat and the breath, all of these things through here physically, combined with these just barely conscious mental images of what your body looks like, of what your face looks like, of the expressions that you're making, of what your face might look like while you're talking or looking at other people. That self-reflective thing where you know somebody else is looking at you and you are seeing yourself in your mind the way that they are seeing you, and you are reflecting back on um, what is happening in your what you're expecting they see when they're looking at you, and you are actually seeing that as well,
Ah,
combined with any thoughts about whatever it is that you're thinking or talking about, or all of those things that go on, and all of the physical reinforcements of that, whether it's if it's something that you're thinking of that has an emotional component, feeling the emotional component in the body reinforces the thoughts. It's that cycle that goes on that creates the seeming density of self somewhere, usually in this general region. It can be different for others, but that's kind of the most average. And all of that feels like I am operating in the world and I am talking to you and you are seeing this and I am seeing that. And, it really feels like there's something very solid about the experience. But it is possible to then shift out of that and recognize that all that is there is sensation, thoughts, and it's just empty space. And of course, your vision is still going to show up where you are seeing whatever is in front of the eyes, because we're not talking about some supernatural thing where all of a sudden you get 360-degree view from, 6 feet above the body. It's not that. The perception will be still of whatever the head is pointing at, because that's just biology. That's just the
right.
way we work. It's not that. It's that there's a feeling normally that everything out there is pointing back to something in here. And there's a feeling of checking in that we do very frequently, which is kind of subtle. But there's a looking out and this feeling of recoiling back in. You're checking in with something which seems to create a distance between I'm in here, that guitar is out there. And I'm going back and forth to know that that is something that is not me. I feel this. This is me. I don't feel that. That's not me. And then we also have the mental layers of, I know what that is. That's a guitar. I know how to play guitar. I want to play that guitar, and then all of those things come in, or I don't like that guitar. I hate that brand of guitar, whatever. All of those thoughts come in afterwards. But what you're looking at is just color and shape. Beyond that, everything else is thought and some sort of assumption label that is being projected onto our world. But again, that's like sixth fetter. Kristyn?
I often hear this and I just want to clear this up. Color and shape to me is still concepts. So when
Yeah,
you say,
well,
is that okay to,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's
all
we
you're
just
saying
yeah,
is,
it's just words. But what you're actually looking at is just the raw that's there, without the thought of that's a guitar, that's an amplifier, that's a door, that's a whatever. It's just the way that it appears, right? Do you know what I
yeah, it's just that then what is that actually? So that's how I
mean?
work. And it just always hear this thing about color and shape. I'm like, but what the hell is that actually?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. They're just that's the closest way we can talk about it while still using words.
Okay.
Beyond that, because otherwise it's just to denote that the thingness of something, like the guitarness or the plantness or the bedness or whatever else, that is something that we are putting on it. When we really look at it as it is, a thing is not, it has no function, it has no name. We don't even know what it does unless we are using our minds to say, oh, I've seen that before or something like it, and I know that this is what it is. That's why it's really interesting when we're talking about like sixth fet or stuff like that to look at perspective of things. And if you notice, you can look like an armchair. And if you see an armchair from the side, we immediately think, okay, that's a three-dimensional object. I can go and sit in that armchair. But if you actually look at the way that it looks from the side, and unfortunately I don't have like one here to show, but what you actually see is a flat image of a chair, and one arm is higher than the other, but there is no indication that anything can fit in between there. It's a completely flat thing, but we're using this extra sense to say, oh no, I've seen that before. I've sat in one before. There's an element of dimension there that's just not visible from where I am. And so we don't see it as it really is. But for all of this, we're coming back to what we really see as visual artists have a much easier time doing this because this is how they paint or they draw, because they have to see things as they actually are, not as we think they are. So they kind of have, a step ahead in that front. But yeah, Daryl, does that help explain the the centrality of experience that
Yeah, and to answer your question, I can say yes. It's very easy to shift out of that. And in fact, I would say that in the course of a day, there are probably periods of time where that's not happening. And then, say for instance, let's say my daughter is engaging in some sort of behavior that's creating a problem in the house. Like, she's arguing with her mom about something, and that will provoke a reaction. And in that moment of that reaction of, okay, this isn't right, this needs to be addressed, things will kind of harden up again. They'll become firmer, more centralized. Um, it's really you know Patty from POK.
yeah.
Okay. Um, and she talks about normalization, and that still just seems like the most unlikely thing. But I think that there is some degree of normalization which renders this semi-invisible, because, and this here, I think it's okay if I said this under with most other social situations, people go, what? But I've noticed that at night when we go to bed, lights go off, that there's not really a firm boundary between in here and out there. And it becomes really apparent when the lights go out.
Yep.
I think that that's actually there more often than is realized or appreciated.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. And it is really helpful to notice these things because there is a part, as she said, of normalization where you do forget. And that ironically can actually lead to doubt for people because
Yes.
you forget what it was like before you were in that place. It gets so normal that it's like, well, I think that's always been like this, but it hasn't. You just have forgotten how you used to operate.
You're exactly right. And that has created a huge degree of doubt for me.
Yeah.
I mean, it really makes it hard to have a lot of confidence or trust in the fact that I don't think, I think probably there are two really good lines where you can say before and after. And one of them was in 2019, towards the end of that first Finders course I took. But it's really hard to recall what it was like before then. And things like this really create a lot of doubt because on one hand, turn off the lights and, well, it's
nothing there.
Yeah, there's not a hard boundary like there used to be between in here and out there. It's more just sort of all here.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, something happens, some stranger knocks on the door and the dogs go nuts, and, a little bit of a reaction occurs, and suddenly things become much more centralized and, and sort of a semi-conscious inclination to defend something,
Yeah, and notice what's happening though in that moment, right? Somebody knocks on the door, the dogs go crazy. You feel centralized, but in that moment, if you can, take a second to check in with what that centrality actually is. Most likely, physical contractions of the muscles actually tensing up, a flush of adrenaline or some other hormones that are coming in, giving you these sensations in the body, there's going to be a feeling of needing to do something. And then you can investigate, what does it feel like to be able to have the agency to do something? What does it feel when it seems like you are actually getting out of bed to go open the door? Or we have the idea that there's a pull, there's like a force that is moving us in a way where, and actually our assumption is that it feels like we are the force that is moving us. Like
Mhm.
there's something here that has to muster up the energy to, and then we go and we haul our carcass up out of bed and go do the thing. But what is the actual experience of that? Can you find the thing that is that force that is doing the moving? Can you find the agency that is saying, I am going to be able to move my muscles and coordinate my limbs and all of that? How is that actually happening? And use that as a moment of inquiry too. And so you're breaking down that every time that centrality sense feels the strongest, I want you to get really clear about exactly what you're feeling in that moment and recognize the thoughts that come up. And are they self-referential thoughts that I have to do this, or, nobody else can answer the door, or, why are the, you know, whatever your pet peeve of the moment is, recognize the self-referential nature of those and how those cause more of that contraction and more of that feeling of selfness. And
Hmm.
then if you can, come back to that feeling of spaciousness outside of it. Come back to that feeling of there is just a sensation and just a thought floating in empty space. And instead of being that contraction, be the space in which that contraction is happening. And it makes it a lot easier to recognize it when you don't feel like you are it. And getting out and feeling that space around it makes it a lot easier to observe it with a neutral, sort of disidentified, detached sense.
Okay. Well, and I hadn't really been taking quite that thorough an approach to it, and so all that to say is that there's still an area that's ripe for investigation.
Yeah.
But in the last few weeks, that's started to become something that attention has been um, getting pulled towards.
Mhm.
And one thing that is starting to that seems to be operational or operative in those moments is just simply a belief. And in this case, it's there something will happen and then an intention shows up in response to that. And the assumption and belief is that if there, and it's all very kind of preconditioned, it's obviously not intentional,
Yeah.
is, well, if there's an intention, well, surely someone must be having that intention. There must be somebody that's having that intention. And so it sets up this idea that there's someone there.
Yeah. Yeah. Question though, how do you define intention?
Ooh, good question.
Thank you.
Um, I don't know. That may be something I have to spend some time watching when it happens before I can answer it. But um, I would say just right offhand, intention seems like this impetus to do something.
And how has that felt? That impetus?
It usually seems to have some kind of it's partly a contraction.
Yeah.
And the only other way, there's another element to it, and the only way I can describe it is, if you've never seen the movie, it won't help. But
Donnie
Donnie
Darko?
Darko,
Yeah, I
yes,
knew
wow,
exactly what
it's
you're gonna
really
say.
good. Yeah, that thing that would go out in front of him.
Completely,
That's what it's like.
completely. I
That's
love
what
that
it
movie
feels
so much.
like.
Yeah, totally knew you were going to use that as a reference. I love that.
I have to admit that that's really kind of not uncanny, but that's pretty cool that that you knew that's where it was going.
Totally, totally. So, but yes, I know exactly what you mean. But and I want you to do this investigation for yourself, but just as a like a hint towards it, I want you to notice when you have the idea of an intention, you have a thought about something is going to do something, right? So you have maybe an image of like, I have an intention to feed the dog, and you'll see an image in your head of you putting food in a dog's bowl or the dogs wagging their tails hungrily or something. That by itself is just an image and not an intention. It's a thought about something that maybe should be done. In some cases, maybe it's a deflection from doing something else that you don't want to do. It could be any number of things, but leaving that aside, you have an idea, an image will pop up, and then you will feel that, as you said, that muscular contraction. It feels like this kind of suction, but recognize that it's just a physical sensation. It's just something moving in the body. And where is the actual intentionality in that? Split it up into image and sensation and just recognize the constituent parts, and that the intention itself is a label that we put on it afterwards. It's a thought afterwards that I had an image in mind, I had a feeling in the body. That was my intention to do something. And that comes in after those things have appeared.
Okay, so to make all of this clear, there's some sort of external event
Yep.
that's a stimulus that creates this impulse to do something. That
Yeah.
impulse to do something is accompanied by or driven by a mental image and a feeling in the body,
Yeah.
a sense of contraction.
Yep.
Okay, did I miss anything?
And or pull. Like for
Okay,
me, I would say there's a feeling of it's a very slow muscular movement that does have that kind of feel to it. But notice what it is. It's not something like it's really like magical and supernatural or something that's really pulling you to do it. Because even if there was a self in you who was capable of doing it, what would that sensation actually be? Would that be a physical self who is pulling the body along with it? Like, what do we take that sense to be, that sense of pull or intention, even if there was some soul thing in there that was really a constant me who's got control over this body? How is that any indication of how the movement to go feed the dogs is happening?
wow, that's there's a there's an assumption of something that works there when there's actually kind of um, a missing element.
Yeah.
Even if there is some sort of soul or something somewhere in the body, um, there's something missing in that explanation.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's some sort of little homunculus behind the eyes, and something needs to happen, and well, it still doesn't explain how it's getting done.
No, it doesn't.
Whoa. Wow. Wow. Golly, talk about assumptions.
Uh-huh.
Wow. It's funny. So it's hidden in plain sight, but the greater percentage of humanity is walking around with the assumption that that's actually uh, working, that it's actually working and getting things done.
Yeah, and if I don't do it, nobody's gonna do it. And if I don't, make myself do it, I'm not gonna do it. But who is that one making yourself do something? And I mean, there's so many layers of confusion in that we just don't investigate. The better part of me is going to make the worst part of me move the body and actually perform an action that both of us don't want to do, but one of us knows that we should do. I mean, it's a very confusing way of thinking.
Well, and if that's the case, then how many more selves are in there?
Exactly.
I mean, that could wind up just going on, an infinite regress.
Can.
Holy cow, it's really crowded in here.
Absolutely so. Yeah, it's a wild thing. Um, so yeah, so I invite you to, investigate that idea of intention and being able to, that feeling of being able to do something, that feeling of being able to be pulled to do something, whether you want to do it or not.
Man. Okay. Well, hopefully it will that sense of amazement at the um, revelation or understanding something that was previously not understood will hold. Um,
Keep reinforcing it by looking back at the illusion. We keep going to, if it feels like it's there, investigate it. If it feels like it's there, investigate it.
well, the funny thing about some of this stuff is that sometimes it can have this quality of I don't know. It feels very not really the word I want, but powerful. It has some kind of sense of um, strength or urgency or something to it. And then other times, you can reflect on these sorts of things, and they seem so um, um, insubstantial. It's almost like it's hard to look directly at it or to try to put the attention on it. Well, where is it? Okay, well, I'm going to investigate this. Put the attention on this thing, and then you go to put the attention on it. It's like, well, I can't even really seem to bring it into focus.
Yeah. Nope. I think for the most part, the only time that these things do feel real and solid is when they're not being looked directly at. It's like having there's an elephant in the room, but only when you're not looking directly at it. You see it in its periphery, and as soon as you look at it, it disappears. It's that kind of a thing. Uh,
Okay,
yeah,
huh?
because it's just our operating out of those old assumptions and ways of being, and it's just because it's sort of the default process when we're not looking deeply at things, and so we're undoing that default processing that happens all the time. So the idea that, okay, I woke up this morning, didn't really want to do it, but I knew I had to make breakfast, so I got up, and we would say that that's the just the normal thing that happened because it's very convenient and it's easily processed and it's easily relatable and it tells a nice story, and it's completely bullshit. When you look at the actual experience all along the way, none of that was true. But it's just like how we use like I said, walking through the forest, if you had to see every single tree as a brand new thing that you didn't know what it was, it would be massively overwhelming for the brain. Like we would have just be living in a world of utter confusion and amazement because we wouldn't know what to do with anything. So, on a very practical level, it's useful that you don't have to relearn what a chair is every time you see it, or, what a frying pan is. There are practicalities to having a set dictionary and a set encyclopedia of everything that looks like this is probably some sort of a tree, will probably give shade, probably don't stand under it during a lightning storm, maybe gives wood if I need to build something. Like, that's fine. But the problem is that we use that same kind of easy reference for everything in our experience all the time. And that's what leads us to thinking that things like aversion and craving and um, intentionality and control and free will and all of these things exist just because they haven't actually been stopped and investigated.
Well, and something else that I've noticed in actually looking into things is that there's sort of this hypnotic effect that's created by the fact that like we were talking about, I've got to get up, make breakfast, these linguistic containers that we use to convey something to ourselves and to other people. Hang on a second.
Yeah.
Come on. If it was anyone else, I'd ignore her. She'll just keep scratching until I let her in. But it does create kind of a hypnotic effect that results from doing it for 30, 40, 50 years.
Absolutely.
And the thing that I've wondered, she's changed her mind.
That was a hardcore, like.
Yeah, she's an intense little dog, man.
That's hilarious.
She's pretty amazing. A lot in a very small package.
That's amazing.
But I've wondered about the how do you break that spell?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it would just continued investigation, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Sometimes it feels like this is just going to go on forever.
And I think that's why some people, at least temporarily, it can be an interesting experiment to do, where you do that thing where you walk around not using the word I and not using anything that refers to I. And it does give a little bit of a
Go ahead.
It's all right. It does give a little bit of that. It gives a sense of how much that the wording is actually playing into our experience. But it also sounds really idiotic if you just do it in, normal speech all the time with people. It's not functional. So we still use the words, but it is a helpful investigation to actually not use them and see how that feels and see how that registers differently in your experience. Like in Liberation Unleashed, we do the practice where we have people write down, I am listening to music, I am drinking, I am typing on the keyboard, I am smelling a flower, and then doing it, smelling a flower, typing on a keyboard, listening to music, or even less personal, music is, well, yeah, it's a little hard because there's still going to be something implied in some of those. But even just doing that, taking the I out of it and just writing what's there without that assumption that there is somebody doing it actually changes the experience considerably. Most people say they feel really much more openness when you're using the sentences without the I, and much more contracted when you have an I in the sentence. So there is definitely something to it.
Well, I do that on and off from time to time. It seems to kind of wax and wane, but there are times where, fortunately, my wife is in on all of this with me. She's been through Finder's course and kind of finding her own way through all of this. So it's and our daughter is just used to strange stuff in general happening in the house. It doesn't matter. But there are times where the only way it feels right and makes any sense to refer to is in third person.
Yeah.
Daryl this, Daryl that, and it's not affectation. It's just anything else feels strangely dishonest.
Yeah, I get that. So it's really good that you have those insights and those times when it's like that. And it's just when you're not having those times, when it feels contracted, that's your invitation to investigate.
Well, that's a great lead into the other thing that's kind of been on my mind here for the last week or two, is there's kind of been this sense of just, it sounds really absurd when it gets said out loud, but just kind of going nowhere, just kind of spinning the wheels. It's almost, as if none of this had ever happened,
Yeah. Yeah. And so do we know, though, realistically, how much of that is that normalization and how much of it is wanting something else that is not here at the moment.
I think it's a very varying ratios, but I think it's both of those.
Yeah. So what is your anticipation of where, if you have the idea that I'm not going anywhere, where is that place that you're supposed to be going? What does that look like?
Well, that's the interesting thing because there's a really clear frame of reference for
Yeah.
that. What led to all of this? I mean, the fact that we're even sitting here having this conversation was um, fall of 2014. There was a very profound experience where the way I've always referred to it is the lights were on, but no one was home.
Yeah.
And that was the entire evening. This went on for hours. And that occasionally will still happen from time to time, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for a few hours. One time a couple of years ago, it just kind of showed up out of nowhere. I thought, well, maybe this is it. And of course, woke up the next morning and it wasn't. Okay, well. But that's sort of the frame of reference. That lights are on, but no one's home. Truly just a total absence of anyone being there. I mean, to the point of, you move your hands like, where did that come from? That's like this hand just emerges from the void. It doesn't belong to anyone. There's just this hand there.
Yeah.
And so that's created this expectation of, the end goal. The old thing from the Buddha Suttas, they've done what needed to be done. They've lived the holy life.
Yeah.
That there's this final destination. And that must be what it is.
So what if, and I'm not saying whether it is or not, but what if that was more of a peak experience, insight experience that isn't your ultimate way of being 24/7?
I've considered that, and I changes. Sometimes I lean more that way, other times not. But recently, there's been sort of this idea that, well, it's an experience, and experiences by nature can't last. That's something that's going to inherently be impermanent. And I guess if that's the case, then that's how it is. Although it does seem to kind of beg the question: if that's the case, then what does lay in store? But now saying it out loud, I realize, hold on a minute, let's not ask that question. let's leave that alone. Let's leave that undefined and say we don't know where this is going to go, because that's probably a safer bet and it doesn't create a lot of expectation.
Absolutely so. Yeah, because we really don't know. Everybody is different in that regard, and we're constantly comparing our experiences with what we hear from other people, and we don't know. And so, you had what you experienced then, but it doesn't mean that is necessarily, it doesn't mean that it is or is not the end goal of what is happening now. Maybe, well, I'm curious about the experience too that you had. Was it, did you feel like you were fully functional in that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because when now keep in mind, it's happened multiple times, but that very first time I was in the playground with my daughter, who was much younger then. And so definitely needed someone to look after her.
Yeah.
We got out of the playground okay, got a call from my wife, hey, we need some things. Went to the store, and when the parking lot was very busy. And so, and I've got this 7 or 8 year old with me, and got in and out of the store and back home safely. I mean, navigating social spaces, driving a car. So yeah, absolutely functional. In fact, it was really interesting because I remember hearing when I was in my teens that, awakening, enlightenment, whatever, there were problems because a person can't function without an ego. I was like, well, apparently that's not true, because the system just knows what to do. It's been driving a car all these years. It does it just fine on its own without anyone there to do it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So that sounds, quite plausible. Like that does sound like something that is a livable, because some people have, peak experiences that would not really be livable as a way of functioning in the world. It might be okay if you were living in a mountaintop someplace and, having people bring you food every day, but for the most part, some people have ones that are very, very, uh, they would be closer to like brain damage if you were actually trying to, function through life that way, and it would be really debilitating. So, some of those experiences are great to have. They're great to have insights from, and then it's great to go back to something else. It's a little bit more mundane. But
Right.
you're describing, if you were able to function, if there was um, enough, online that there were no problems. Did you notice any suffering, any issues, any turbulence when those times happen?
When in the within that experience.
Yeah, yeah.
No, in fact, what was curious was noticing that one of the things that qualified the experience, in classic Buddhist terms, was there wasn't any greed or aversion. Uh, there wasn't any wanting things, whether it's wanting to have something or to hold something out. In fact, that first time in 2014, when we got home and we were having dinner, the three of us were sitting at the table, and our daughter just, I forget why, she had a total meltdown. And of course, my wife is having a typical response to that, understandably. I, on the other hand, wasn't. It was like there was this reaction, typical reaction that showed up, but I saw it. It was like the reaction's over here. There's the reaction.
Wonderful.
Cool. No problem. And I just kind of looked, my wife looked at me, and it was, I didn't ask her about it, but it was kind of assumed that she was looking at me because, well, first of all, here's this happening. Second of all, you don't seem to care. And I remember just kind of just shrugging at her, kind of like, well, I don't know what to tell you. It's not a problem. There was a reaction, but it didn't belong to anybody. It just kind of showed up and ran its course and disappeared.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. So a couple things pop up. One is a good insight to recognize about that is that do you know what you were doing before any of these experiences when this happened?
All the others seem to be more or less what I guess we would call spontaneous. But yeah, that first time, the day in the playground, I had done kind of this contemplation while just sitting there on the bench while my daughter was playing. And then after having done that contemplation about parts of the body and is this me? Can the body be
Yeah.
a self? Then I just started walking. It was kind of a circular path around the playground, just kept walking and walking. And anytime thought would start to happen, I would just, no, let's just let the thought go. And just kept doing that persistently so that no thought was happening. And would notice kind of these, what I can only describe as shifts, as sort of this kind of like something changed.
Wow.
Something happened. I couldn't tell you what. And several of those happened, but I didn't realize how deep it had gone until it was time to leave. And when it was time to leave and I started walking down the path leading away to the car, like I said, there's this hand. Like, it doesn't belong to anybody. Where did it come from? There's just this void this hand emerged out of. I said something to my daughter and I was like, what in the heck was that? There's a sound coming from that same void. It doesn't belong to anybody. It's just there are these sounds, but yeah, that's what precipitated the whole thing was that contemplation and spending. We were there for 2 or 3 hours and spent that 2 or 3 hours just, walking, and keeping an eye on her, but also keeping an eye on the internal states. Like, let's just stay quiet.
Yeah. That's amazing. So aside from that one, we see that every other time that it's popped up, it's been a spontaneous occurrence.
Right.
So it's not something that you have to strive for in the future because it's something that you've already had. And it's something
Wow. Okay.
and it's something that has been a spontaneous thing that just happens. It's not like you had to sit for 10 hours in a cave in order to achieve it,
Right.
It's an experience that is always available to you when you are not identified in some way, or potentially when whatever biochemical machine this is, falls into line in such a way that this is the resultant state from it. We don't really know. This is why there's a bit of a mystery here, and it would be really handy if I could tell you, say three Hail Marys and push on this spot on your head, and then you have it. We don't know enough about it yet, but the things to notice are that it's an experience that you've had, that you're putting yourself up against, and it's one that you've had multiple times, which indicates that most likely continuing to do this same sort of insight practice, the same sort of inquiry, is going to help loosen that sense of identity, that connection to body, the connection with all that all the things that we take for granted in there. And that's exactly what we're talking about, is loosening up all of that to where it feels like the sound is just coming from nowhere, and the hands are emerging from the void, and all of that is really amazing, and it's really wonderful, and it's there all the time if you're not caught up in some form of thinking, some form of identification with.
Right. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, seems like the not issue. It seems like the sticking point is holding on to that and having that as an expectation, and this constant frame of reference to, well, it's not like that now.
Yeah. Yeah. But why is what is here now not okay in comparison to that?
I think the answer to that would be that right now there are certain discomforts or unpleasant experiences that have the ability to gain a foothold. Whereas this, whatever you want to call it, not much seems to be a problem.
So back when those experiences were happening, there was no Daryl, right?
Right?
So is there a Daryl now? Did one disappear and then reappear?
Well, short answer is no. I guess I'll just leave it at that. No.
Oh. So whatever is happening now is still happening as just as much of a disconnected space as what was happening then.
Right?
Then there was no Daryl, and there were reactions that were floating off in the distance and then passed. Now there's still no Daryl, and there are thoughts that seem a little bit closer up, a little bit more intense.
Yeah.
But who is that referring to? Who is suffering from that?
No one other than the belief that there is, the belief and the assumption that there is someone who is suffering from that.
And who is the belief?
It's just a belief. It's just mental activity.
And what is a belief?
I guess a preformed set of ideas or a preconceived set of notions.
And so is there anyone there who is experiencing the difference between unidentified, unattached Darrell-less Daryl, and current identified, somewhat attached Darrell-less Daryl?
Say the question again.
Yeah, I'll try that. What was the difference between the old experience of the completely unattached, unidentified Darrell-less Daryl, and the current partially attached, partially identified Darrell-less Daryl?
I think in a word, identification.
And who is identified?
Same answer as before. I mean, no one. It's just this assumption.
So I want you to really look into that, because is it okay or not for is it Is it really problematic that things are appearing the way they are now compared to how they were in those experiences? If there is nobody in either of those experiences that is suffering or there to experience the difference?
What was the first part of that question?
Yeah, is it not okay that things are the way they are now in what we're calling a partly identified state? Is it not okay for that to be like that when let me rephrase it so maybe it's a little bit clearer. There's a memory of an experience in which there seemed to be no identification, and that was taken to be a good thing. There's an experience now which is considered to be, there's still not really anybody there, but there's a little bit of identification of something. And there's an idea that that's not as good because I'm comparing it to a memory when I said that was a better thing. Is what is here right now really problematic in some way?
No, no, it's just the idea that it is and the comparison.
Yeah. And if you didn't have a memory of that other time, that wouldn't even be a possibility.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have an idea of how things could be any different than they are right now, how would they be unsatisfactory? How could they be unsatisfactory?
Hmm. Well, in and of themselves, they're not. Again, it's just the ideas, thoughts, the mental activity around it.
Yeah. And is there any problem with the mental activity?
Hmm. Hmm. It's funny. It's like that old saying, it's turtles all the way down.
Mhm.
No, it's not, except for the mental activity around the mental activity. Adding it up in layers.
Mhm. But if the thought can just be seen, the mental activity can just be seen as a thought that's not relating to anyone, that's not talking to anyone, that has no let me rephrase that too. So is it really the thought that has something unsatisfying about it? Or is it the physical reactions to that thought?
Uh, yeah, it's the reactions to that thought which create seems to bring more thought along with it.
Yeah. So detaching them and recognizing that what is here in the physical sensation is still not, is there anything wrong with what is in your physical sensation right now, even when you are having a thought that seems to be unsatisfactory?
As of right now, no.
Good. So if you don't appeal to the past and remember and compare to how things were at the best moments of your life when you thought you were absolutely enlightened, and if you don't project to the future and say something could be different now, or it could be different in the future, or to imagination and say it could be different now, I could be not identified. I could have a whatever in your house that you don't currently have that you would like, I'm not whatever I want to be. Without a thought that anything could possibly be different, because it can't,
Hmm.
is there any actual problem with what you are experiencing in this moment?
No.
No. And coming to that recognition over and over again is contentment and equanimity.
Hmm. Well, it's good to see that contentment and equanimity are not something that is uh, hard to come by, as some traditions make it out to be.
Oh. It's our natural state when we're not lost in thought and excuse me, excuse me, wanting something to be other than it is. When you're absolutely with what is here without a thought that it could be otherwise, our natural default state is contentment. We've been sold a lot of false information that, having a new car and a trophy wife and whatever else, big mansion, all these things are what we need to be, you know, none of that's true. And then all of the thoughts about, if only I was 5 pounds lighter, if only I was, anything that's your personal pet insecurity, if only I was a little bit more awakened, whatever it is, that is still a thought that something is not good enough now. And I have in my mind an idea of what it could be. And I'm comparing those two, and this one is losing out. This one is not as satisfactory as the thing that I can imagine. And then that's where all of our lack of contentment comes from.
I forget who it was that said it, but it was reading about. I believe it was a Westerner going over to Southeast Asia to ordain, and being around these people. I think they were from Thailand, and hearing whoever it was, I forget the title, the person who was the head of the monastery there,
Yeah.
and talking about how Westerners suffer from their thinking, and how he thought that was so so unbelievable, and was really struck by the how unreal that was, that people would be so traumatized, so affected, so negatively impacted by what was going on in their head.
Yeah. It's wild, isn't it?
And
Can
true.
I ask a question about this? Because
Yeah.
this is another spiritual term that I hear a lot. This lost in thought.
Mm-hmm.
When I investigate that, I don't I it there's not a problem with lost in thought either. So when we always say that, oh, it's just the problem is that we're lost in thought, but then I can't, and I know what you mean because it does seem like a problem.
Yeah.
And that does seem like a problem, but then I don't even know if there is any such thing as lost in thought. That's how, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. All right. So I understand the question with the term. So the idea that we're lost in thought does imply a thinker. It implies someone who could be lost in thought and then be awake, right? But what we're talking about really, when I use the phrase, it's really identification with thought, which is itself, all identification is another thought. It's just a cycle of thoughts that have a certain self-reflective nature to them. It's a thought thinking about a me, and in some way where it becomes all self-referential. You have a line of thinking which is self-referential, and it's self-generating, where one feeds on the other, feeds on the other, feeds on the other, so that you believe all of these stories about a person and about your deficiencies, about how great you are, about all the things that you have to do and all the things that you have done. And it's just a line of thought that is creating a sense of self. Why we talk about the benefit of not having that is that when you are right here with direct experience, there are no selfing thoughts, which are not, so there's no feeling of a self because it's not being created by that cycle of thought. Now, on its own, I agree with you actually that thought by itself, there's nothing wrong with thought. It's not that thought is a problem. It's not. It's only these self-reinforcing cycles of identification thoughts, which are problematic if you are trying to wake up out of the delusion of being a self. Otherwise, it's fine. But if it causes you suffering because now you're thinking about, that cashier was so rude to me and I should have said something back and I'm never going to go back to that store again. And, all of these things, these thoughts that people tend to very often get lost in for hours and days at a time are constantly reinforcing that self, reinforcing the victimhood, reinforcing all the stories about who we are and how we relate to the world and all of that. Those are, those are what's caused the suffering because those are creating this whole world out of nothing. They're creating a victim in the place. Out of nothing. They're creating interactions and perceptions of those interactions and assumptions of what other people were thinking and doing, and that I know what their motivations were, and all of that, and all of that's coming out of us and out of this thinking. And so that's why it's helpful to get off of that ride for a while and just be with the raw experience of everything without having the assumption that I know what a cashier was thinking, that I know she was rude to me because she didn't like something about me or because she thought I didn't, whatever. All these silly things that we do, we create an entire world out of that. When you come down to it, you just have whatever's right in front of you. And feels very, very freeing.
So before we run out of time,
Yep.
now I'm still working with what you asked me to do whenever it was.
Yeah.
It's been a while now.
Months ago now.
Yeah, but the don't like the term. It doesn't seem like seems like kind of the affirmations,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term.
Yep.
Well, I mean, there's the affirmation is kind of weighted down, kind of.
I know. It has a lot of that positive woo-woo psychology stuff attached
Yeah,
to it.
Stuart Smalley. So,
Yeah, exactly.
but so I've been working with those, so that's still ongoing.
Amazing.
Now, just a little while ago, you suggested something else in terms of looking at intention and all these things that happen in the moment when there's a reaction to some sort of external stimulus. So, if you don't mind, sum that up for me briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you can still be doing affirmations when you are out and about, just, find your time, anytime that you're just doing activities that are kind of mindless and you might otherwise be wandering in your mind anyway, it's something that's just a basic task of daily living, then it's really good to be using those affirmations as a sort of, Pernilla refers it to like a type of brainwashing where it's like, you just have that thought running all the time and it's just blocking out all the other thoughts. So that's just the thing that's reinforcing all of those other years of the negative thought. Um, I also recommend to people sometimes, especially if they have a tendency of being self-deprecating in a way, because a lot of people will do it in very overt ways where they're like, oh, I'm, such a terrible person because, or I talk so much and I know I have to stop that, or we have these self-criticisms. And then sometimes it's very subtle where you even do it like in jest, where it seems like you're just lightly poking fun at yourself, but
Mm.
actually there's some real teeth behind it. So for them, I recommend anytime you catch yourself doing something like that, no matter how subtle, counter that with that. I love myself exactly as I am. One of those positive things to undo that little negative jab that you just took at yourself. So that can be really useful. But I want you to have in your toolkit at the ready anytime that you do feel like you have intention to do something, or that you have something happens in the house and you start to feel contracted. In the moment of that first bit of contraction where it starts to feel like things are coalescing back down again into somebody who has to do something, in that moment, just take a second to scan through all the senses in the body, the physical sense, the especially check your face, because facial expressions have a lot to do with our sense of self and a lot to do with who we take ourselves to be, what our we get it like you know how they say if you smile it actually sends happy hormones, in your brain, and it
Yeah.
actually creates a sense of happiness just by the feedback of an actual smile with the eyes and the mouth. There's this constant reinforcing of how we feel based on the physiology of, and this, the how the face is looking right now and how the face feels from the inside. And so recognizing all of that, the thoughts, anything that feels like it could be intention, that it could be motivating you to do something, that feel of that Donnie Darko chest thing, investigate that for a moment before you actually do what you're about to do. Feel that pull. And especially if you put it off and you don't do the thing that you know you have to do for a moment, you'll really feel it amplified. And so take advantage of that pull of knowing I'm supposed to be doing something, but I'm resisting. Well, what does that feel like? Really, really investigate that strange dissonance that's happening where there's like one person saying you got to do it, another person saying, no, 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 I'm waiting. I'm doing this investigation, and then feeling that tension arise and just get really curious about that strange experience of internal duality.
Okay.
And so it's really, it's not something that you have to do seated or anything all the time. It's just something in your daily life to recognize anytime this happens, that's your chance to give it a shot.
Something you just said, it's interesting to see how things have turned out after decades of meditation. It seems like more is happening going through daily life.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, I just, after having kind of gotten away from it for a few months because of having done it for so long, returning to the sitting practice, it's kind of amusing to see how the sitting practice, at least appears. I know this isn't really the case because long-term sitting does have an effect, but it's funny to see how that seems to be, it doesn't seem to really directly yield much of a result, but there's all this stuff that's kind of happening, and it's gradual. It takes time for momentum to build, but where it just shows up as you're going about your daily affairs.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think,
yeah, Daryl, I had to step away from my meditation because my meditation itself became a really horrible, vicious trap that was going to obstruct me from going forward.
Wow.
I had to walk away from it completely. And then I was able to reindulge it in a good way. And the same thing was with my 12 steps too. I had to walk away from that until I could come back to it. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. It's nice to hear someone else having a similar experience. I don't know that mine was a trap. It's just I've been doing it for so long and I've gotten caught up in a striving around it, trying to get to a certain place.
Yep.
I blame Chuladasa for that in his damn book.
Completely. It's a fascinating book, but yeah, it really creates some striving. I know.
Heck yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So I got away from it for about 6 months and now returning to it. And it's been what I'm going with now. My model is what I learned when I first learned it years ago when I was going to the Soto Zen Center. It's like, do nothing, just sit, do nothing. But what about do nothing? But there's this do nothing.
Awesome. Love that.
You go and sit with the, I forget what his title was, Roshi, I think.
Yeah.
You ask him questions about things, just continue sitting. I need to ask him a question, but she's just going to tell me to keep sitting.
Yep. I found the Mind Illuminated is such a fascinating book, and it creates such a sense of striving though, because it's layer after layer after layer, and
then you have, I got to, I think, the 4th or 5th stage and then just stalled out there for years. And I was even working with people who trained with them, and it just stayed there, stalled out at that same place. And so finally, you know what? Someone suggested I just walk away from it. Like, you know what? I think you're right.
Yeah, not every style is suitable for everybody. And how
Exactly.
he approaches, is right. So yeah, do what works for you. And notice, I love that you noticed the striving that was underneath it. So if you're doing it for that purpose, that's absolutely the wrong motivation to be doing it. It should be this natural thing of really feel like meditating today, and then you meditate. Not that if I have to do this thing for this reason, because that's reinforcing that identity that is going to get something in the future by doing something today. You're
Yeah.
creating a sense of time. You're creating a sense of cohesion of a character who's going to improve over time. It's very subtly self-reinforcing.
Yeah, you're right. Well, and it's nice to return to it with, there are no expectations, there are no demands. You're just going to do this. And,
Yeah.
in fact, the way I refer to it is I'm just going to go enjoy some quiet. I'll tell my wife, I'm just going to go have some quiet for myself.
Yeah.
And that's really all it's about is I just want some quiet.
Absolutely love that. Yeah. And you should.
But yeah, the affirmations and then now this, well, at least I can say it with the affirmations because I've been doing it for a while. That's just, and the momentum is still building. I mean, there are days where I'll forget to do it and I'll realize, it's getting close to bedtime. I don't think that crossed my mind once today, but there are other days where it shows up multiple times throughout the course of the day, just
amazing.
There it is. And, hey, do this.
Yeah. Don't be forceful with it. Just let it happen like that. And it's really going to be, I think it's going to be really helpful. Just takes time.
Well, already it has. I mean, I think there's still a long way to go with it, but already it seems like, the predominant negative voice for me was my mom.
Okay.
The story is not even necessary. Won't go into it, even if we had time.
Yeah.
But already it seems like that negative voice from that woman has started to kind of. It seems like it's getting undermined.
Amazing.
Something happened the other day, and it's normally the place where that negative narrative would show up, and it started to show up like, no, that's not really true. It can be seen very clearly that's just a story, and there's no truth to it, and I'm tired of buying into that.
Well done. That's amazing. I'm super happy for that.
Yeah, it's nice.
That's so good.
I'm curious to see where this goes in time. So.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Super happy about that.
All right. Well, I know you've got
you
got to get to.
Yeah, less than an hour I have another 1-to-1 session, so I gotta go.
I'll end it with this. I'll end it with this in the how the mind deludes us department.
Yeah.
When the person walked into the room where Kaiser's sitting, the brain was telling me for about 5 seconds or so that there was in fact someone in the room with me. What? I didn't even hear the door open. There's no one in the room with me. And then it took a second, and finally it got cognized, like, oh, that's happening over where Kaiser is.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well done. Sixth fetter right there.
Don't trust the mind.
Do not trust the mind. Well, thank you so much, everybody. This has been amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Happy New Year to all three of you. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right. See you then. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.